From the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis, this is Indiana Issues. Here's your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz.
Hello and welcome to Indiana Issues, the public affairs program where we go beyond the headlines and soundbites and bring you Indiana's news and issues in their entirety. Well, Indiana lawmakers have called it a session. What did they get done? They got a lot of things done. We talk about tax cuts, education issues, also employer vaccine mandates, and the like. And so we'll talk about what stalled and what actually made it across the finish line. Our guests today are Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Republican Cam Carter, and Democrat Lindsey Shipps. So my friends, although it was labeled a very short session, you would know it by all the issues that lawmakers tackled. Like we said, employer vaccine mandates, permitless firearms carry, school issues, tax cuts, you name it. So we start by asking overall, Cam, we'll start with you. How do you think session went this year?
Well, I often refer to February as the longest, shortest month of the year, and that kind of sums up what this short session was like. There was an awful lot of issues on the waterfront. It might have to do with the fact that we're in an election year, that there are new districts for the first time in a decade, and the pace was fast. They wanted to motivate their base, show their political supporters what they were capable of, show the taxpayers what they were capable of, and also get back to these new districts, I think.
Lindsey, your thoughts on how session went overall?
I really wasn't a big fan of session this year. I think that the average working Hoosier really won't see a lot of results. It was mostly a session packed for big business, corporations, and big donors at the State House. So I agree with Cam that it's obviously an election year, and that's very obvious if you look at the legislation that was passed this year.
Mark, from a libertarian perspective, how do you think lawmakers pulled things off this session?
Oh, they took on an awful lot. And as a libertarian, I think they need to be way more focused. I'm not a big fan of government meddling, and there was an awful lot of meddling into people's personal lives being done by this session. Most of it didn't get through, but some of it was pretty scary to libertarians. And we were lucky that the Senate actually slammed some of it down at the last minute. So it was just an interesting session. And I think a lot of it will probably go away. I may be wrong. I hope I'm not wrong, because I think it was political posturing, because it's an election year, new districts, and they're trying to keep in their seats.
Well, one thing I thought was interesting, I want to get all three of you guys' thoughts on this, were the employer vaccine mandates, the exemptions. Lawmakers had like 2 8-hour, 9-hour hearings over the course of session to deal with employer vaccine mandates. And at the end of the day, they came with a mandate, an exemption for if you had a medical exemption, if you had natural immunity, but also if you could get a religious exemption, but you had to basically go through Title VII, Title IX, what the federal government has said. They couldn't just take your word for it. Mark, we'll start with you. Was that sort of the right balance, or should lawmakers have left it alone altogether?
Well, most libertarians would say leave it alone. Employers can make decisions that they want to do. Now, some things have been considered by the federal government and state government to be so important, such as a lack of no religious discrimination. And my biggest complaint about the statutes on religious discrimination is awful lot of people I know that they have strong religious beliefs, but they don't have good evidence to back it up, like they go to a church or whatever, maybe just a small family gathering. They just might read a lot and have strong opinions. And by any definition, they're religious, but it's hard to show. You can't go there and say, my minister says I should go to church every day or every week. So it's a real problem on that. From a libertarian standpoint, the employers can make that choice. I've got my opinions on what they should do, but it's up to them to do it, other in the most extreme and the most important situations.
Lindsey, your thoughts on those employer exemptions? Did the lawmakers strike a right balance, or are you like Mark, should they just maybe left things alone, or maybe went further?
I think for Indiana, we did strike a good balance. You saw employers who were supportive of this legislation as it came out of the Senate. It was something that they were working on routinely. This was their number one priority, as indicated by number of chambers of commerce, including the state chamber. So these were items that were always going to be at the top priority, no matter what the pandemic looked like as we came out of session. But just because the urgency was there due to Omicron, I think they came to the right balance and eventually I mean, to be honest with you, I was really interested to see how this all worked out, because we really didn't know how Omicron was going to pan out, right? In the middle of it, it was really, we were just kind of sitting there in the State House, like, it's almost like a pandemic isn't happening. And then it was just the balance seemed to be struck. And once the Senate passed Bill 1001, and we knew Senate Bill 3 wasn't going to be it, because of some machinations in the House, we were pleased with the bill.
Cam, I want to get your thoughts on this, because you actually used to work for the Indiana Chamber.
I did work there for about a decade or so, and believe in science. And I think, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. And I think that the fact that Omicron turned out to be more viral, less lethal, and we saw it peaking, and now, boy, caseloads are really, really down. Let's hope that's a continuing trend. But personally, I think employers know how best to protect their workforce, protect their places of employment, and still get things done. This was clearly, if you saw the machinations and the public testimony, an effort to cater to the more conservative and right-wing base of the Republican Party out there. As an erstwhile Republican, I get what's going on politically, but I think we need to let science, data, rationality, and employers do what they think is in their best interest. And the best way to get through a public health emergency is to do the things necessary to get there.
Something else we also saw this session, and we'll get to the educational issues and tax cuts in just a bit. This session marked Ty Deer's second year as Speaker of the House. Lindsey, how do you think the Speaker's been doing so far?
Yeah, I have no beef with how the Speaker's handled the chamber. It's been lovely to have a chamber and work in the lobby where you know what's going to happen that day in terms of simple procedure. You know when we're going to come in the next day. And there was really, I worked in the chamber when there was a lot of uncertainty, and we really didn't know when we were going to show up the next day. It really depended on a lot that was happening in the chamber that particular moment. And so it's very nice to have a chamber that's run that way and organized with an organized priority. And I would say the same for the Senate as well. A lot of us still think of pro tem as President Pro Tem Bray. We still think he's new. It's still a new space for all of us to be in. We're still getting used to that. And so it's, as a lobbyist working in the hallway, I like that certainty. But I'll be honest with you, when it comes down to some decisions, like, for example, the amendment that Representative Ryan Dvorak brought to divest Indiana state pension funds from Russia, I didn't like that leadership. I didn't think that was good. I think it needed to be led from the chair, that we hear that amendment and that we vote on it without the procedural politicization that came of it. And we could have had some movement forward in a positive way.
Our guests on the program today are Democrat Lindsey Shipps, Republican Cam Carter, and Libertarian Mark Rutherford. You're watching Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Today, we're talking about the last days of the Indiana General Assembly. My friends, I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about Hoosiers. They'll likely see some tax cuts over the next few years if the economy continues to grow. Lawmakers passed $1 billion tax cut proposal, reducing the income tax rate from 3.2 to 2.9% over the next 7 years. They also cut the utility receipts tax, but they did not touch the business personal property tax, but they did also agree to spend billions to pay off the debt. Mark, let's go ahead and start with you here. Your thoughts on tax cuts and just the overall fiscal plan whatsoever that Republicans put together.
Well, I'm a big fan of tax cuts. I think that you, like a family does, you have some savings, but once your savings are adequate for what you think you need for the future, then you might go and decide to do something special, or you might give more donations to somebody or support a family member not as well, or in the case of the state of Indiana, cut taxes. So I think this is a good idea that they do this. I think it's a good policy. What I don't like is that I don't see how they're doing it and how it's going to help people. I mean, it's a good amount of money to some people, and I'm very critical of some commentators going, "Oh, it's only $120." Well, I know there's an awful lot of people out there. $120 can make or break you in a month or two, and for all that they have and can afford. So that will help them. But like the gas tax, it's way too high. they promise they're going to use it for roads that they aren't, in my opinion, that it's being used for other purposes or to deflect other things. So, but it's a good sign to start going this way, and I hope they keep doing it.
Cam, let me get your thoughts, particularly on the fact that lawmakers preferred to cut taxes over pay off the teachers' pension debt.
Yeah, well, they kind of split the baby there, didn't they? I think I saw an analysis where, like amounts were going to pay off the pension debt, which is liability on the state's books, and a promise to those that worked in the system, while also providing the individual income tax cut phased in under certain circumstances. And the more you pay, the more these tax cuts mean to you. I think probably the most meaningful one was the utilities tax, which will benefit a lot of members of my former employer, the Indiana Chamber of Commerce, a lot of members of the Indiana Manufacturers Association, because those industrial users use a lot of electricity. So that's a meaningful cut to them rather than it is to the consumers. But everyone will see this and feel it. What I found fascinating during the session is the difference of opinion between the two supermajorities in the chambers. Republican Senate members didn't necessarily see eye to eye with Republican House members here, wanted to take a more prudent course, and they kind of ran down the middle. I hope we will see that this doesn't harm the state's fiscal position in fairly uncertain times. No one needs to go into what the global situation is right now. But we don't know if we're looking at raising interest rates or steady interest rates. We just really can't tell with any degree of certainty what tomorrow is going to bring. So I hope it all plays out. And I think it was prudent of them through that dynamic of the two chambers to put in some of these breaks and these conditions preceding to the tax cuts continuing to be cut and phased in over a number of years.
Lindsey, during that last week of session, Senate and House Democrats, I want to say it was Tim Lannon of Anderson and also Greg Porter of Indianapolis, introduced an amendment to basically take some of the surplus and cut the gas taxes, and that would have provided immediate relief to a lot of Hoosier families. Did lawmakers make a mistake by not at least temporarily suspending the gas tax?
I don't know. That's remained to be seen. You have to remember that if that were suspended, that would only mean $3-4 for every fill up. And that's exactly what happened with the utility receipts tax. I mean, this is frankly, from my perspective, it's an effort to say something that we're doing that we're not really doing. A tax cut for Hoosier consumers for the utility receipts tax equals to maybe $2 or $3 a month. And that is way less than the gas tax that was proposed to be to either sunset or to, I can't remember what the proposal was from Representative Porter and Senator Lannon specifically, but if it was a holiday or I don't remember, but it's the very least that they could have done. And that didn't happen. And so when it happens to benefit big business, instead of Hoosier consumers, we're paying upwards of $400 or $500 for utility bills. I know the city of Evansville right now and surrounding counties have an incredible amount of increased bills. Vectron already the highest, Centerpoint, sorry, now rebranded, but they're already the highest in the state. And when that doesn't happen for consumers, at the residential consumers, Hoosiers, Joe Hoosiers, that sends a message that the State House does not care about their outcomes. And when you tell folks that they can't adjust temporary assistance for needy families at a cost to the state of under $100 million, but you can give big business a break, it just tells people the priorities are completely whacked.
Mark, I want to get your thoughts on this, particularly the fact that lawmakers decided to cut taxes with all this sort of economic uncertainty. We got inflation, which is eating all of our pocketbooks. You got the situation over in Russia and Ukraine as well. Was this a good time to actually lower taxes, or maybe once again maybe focus on paying off that debt, which would have freed up more money down the road without having to increase the tax burden on Hoosiers?
I think it's always a good time to cut taxes, especially when, I can criticize state government for all types of things. But one thing I think they've proved dramatically, since I've really been following it over the last 35 years, is how they manage the budget, what they use the money for. There's so many things they've done that fiscally it's way more responsible than it was, in my opinion, than 30, 40 years ago. Not saying that it was that bad then, but it's even better now. and tighter. So I think we go ahead and do that. We can predict all you want. I can't tell you what will happen in 10 years. I can pretend to. I can watch The Simpsons and use that to predict it, if you all understand that joke about The Simpsons predicting things that happen later.
They predicted Donald Trump.
Or yeah, they predicted Donald Trump. So, I think you do what you have now, you see what you have, and it wasn't a huge cut, in my opinion, but it was a start in the right direction. If it turns out things go haywire, then you readjust again. And we have the ability, if the governor would do it, to call a special session if you have to do it quickly.
You're watching Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org, coming to you from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. We're going to take ourselves a quick break. We come back, we'll talk about how education was a big focal point in this short session and permitless or quote-unquote constitutional carry. And we'll also talk about who won and who lost this session as well. You're watching Indiana Issues. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Our guests on the program today are Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Republican Cam Carter, and Democrat Lindsey Shipps. We're talking about the 2022 legislative session, which ended recently, and talk about what lawmakers did and what they did not accomplish. My friends, education issues were a big deal, obviously, this legislative session. Some things did not get as far as activists wanted. Some things actually went through what the activists wanted. For example, the ban of teaching critical race theory didn't get through. Also, keeping inappropriate material from children librarians, that did not get through as well. But a ban on transgender athletes playing female sports did get through, as well as on its way to the governor's desk, as well as more access to the public for public meetings. Cam, let's start with you. Your thoughts on how lawmakers did with education.
Well, they'll do better next session when the budget is written, and that's really where education policy is tremendously impacted. Follow the money. I think in terms of missed opportunities because of some of the issues that they did pursue that you mentioned with regard to the teaching of race and history in our schools. For instance, there was an effort to try and provide more equitable funding for charter school students that didn't make it, and they could have made progress there. There's a lot of cultural hot button issues that touched in the area of education that were pursued this session, and I think not to the detriment of the Hoosier public and the image of Indiana around the country. The discussions around critical race theory, which is not taught anywhere outside of a law school, it was probably detrimental to the state's reputation. We have people like Stephen Colbert and CNN and other national and international news organizations picking up on that. It gave me the heebie-jeebies and reminded me of the Religious Freedom Act that we went through under the Pence administration and that sequence of bad PR for the state. So I think the General Assembly does its best work in the area of K through 12 education when they focus on academics and when they focus on students and student outcomes. I don't know that we necessarily saw that this session.
Lindsey, one thing I thought was interesting this session was how strong and how organized the teachers were. A lot more organized than I've ever seen in a really, really long time. Matter of fact, I've seen them this mad and this upset since Glenda Ritz beat Tony Bennett back in 2012, to be brutally honest with you. What your thoughts on how teachers performed this session?
My thoughts on how teachers performed as an outside force in the State House?
Yeah.
Is that your question? Okay. So I think it would be only natural for an entity who has been a target, who has had a painted target on their backs for the last, 10 years. I mean, there's been efforts every single year that I can remember in recent history that have targeted teachers for not doing some this year it was critical race theory, which isn't even, as Cam noted, taught in Indiana schools, K through 12. And it becomes, couched as an effort for parental transparency. I mean, I have no idea why anyone in this state right now would want to become a teacher. We have sent them so many bad messages. So if you ask me, how did the teachers work as an outside force inside the building? I mean, you got a lot of experience in organizing and getting your ducks in a row to defend yourselves. You've been placed as a target for legislators for the past decade. So I have no reason to believe that they haven't been improved in the past few years and will continue to defend themselves. But I'll be honest with you, it would be really nice to have a session where legislators don't have teachers as a target. Let them teach.
Mark, let me get your thoughts on that, because it seems like there were a lot of these cultural issues that popped up, whether it was critical race theory, transgender, athletes. But then again, as Cam and Lindsey said, there's no evidence of critical race theory being taught in Indiana K through 12 school, nor of any transgender athletes trying to participate in girls' sports. So, were these solutions in search of problems? I guess is my question.
Well, in a large way, they were solutions in search of problems, but everybody's missing what in my opinion, is the real problem, and that is let teachers teach. The administrations are bloated and they want to do things that the teachers don't want to do, or don't allow the teachers time to do because they've got to do all this other stuff that they don't think is related to teaching their students the best way possible. A legislature should do the same thing. Let the teachers teach. There's a lot of thought out there, in my opinion, and that would solve a lot of problems, because then they'd have more time to talk to parents and get an understanding of why maybe parents are concerned about some things. And maybe occasionally teachers will go, yeah, I'll change. And that would make everybody way happier. So I think that's really the real solution, is let the teachers teach. We've got a lot of work to let that happen. The other thing about all of this, though, is Indiana has lots of alternatives to the public schools. Many of them are very affordable, and many of them solve the issues that are being addressed out there as a problem. If it is a problem, you've got alternatives. Life isn't easy. Sometimes you have to pick one, and one may be a little harder to do than the other, but it may be what you think is best for your kids. So do it.
Mark Rutherford, Lindsey Shipps, and Cam Carter are guests on the program today, Republican, Democrat, Libertarian. You're watching Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim, the editor and publisher of IndianPolitics.org. Another issue, my friends, that really popped up this session was the constitutional or permitless carry. Hoosiers no longer need a permit to carry a firearm in public if the governor does sign this legislation. The arguments were contentious. Proponents saying law-abiding citizens should not have to go to the government to exercise their right. Public safety folks, like you just saw Superintendent Doug Carter, State Police there, saying, hey, this will put law enforcement in danger. Cam, we'll start with you. Do you think the governor will sign the permitless carry bill? Because he's got three options. He can either sign it and it goes into effect, not sign it and it goes into effect, or he could veto it.
Yeah, first disclaimer, Cam Carter and Doug Carter are not related insofar as I know. So I'm not carrying anyone's water here, but I don't know what Governor Holcomb's going to do. I suppose it depends on what he sees as his political future. This is an issue that's very important to the Republican base and to the NRA and those folks in the gun lobby, Guy Rutherford's 2A project. So I suppose he signs it if he is looking at a political future, a U.S. Senate run or something of that nature. But I have to agree with my shared surname, Superintendent Carter, and the law enforcement community. There is a right to bear arms in this country, but with rights come responsibilities. I've been a gun owner. I've been permitted well before they turned it a few years ago into a lifelong permit. It is not an onerous process. And candidly, if you're sitting there and you're concerned about violent crime in Indianapolis or any city around the state of Indiana, it's kind of hard for me to square this permitless carry and the passion for it with those concerns. Citizens should exercise some responsibility when they claim this right, which they do have.
Lindsey, I thought it was interesting how this whole permit issue went down, a permitless carry issue went down. Because the first was the original bill that passed out of the House, then went to a Senate committee. That language was stripped, and new language put in. Then it went to another committee, and that language was stripped, and the new language put back in. And almost got sort of vertigo just trying to keep tabs on this issue this session.
So full disclosure, I am a Moms Demand Action, and I'm also I have a license to carry lifelong, have since 2012. And I would completely agree. It turned into a circus. To use your word, that's the best word. After the committee hearing, which was 8 hours long, 8 hours, that was probably the longest hearing I think we had this year, aside from the 10:01 hearings that happened before session. But Chairwoman Liz Brown in the Senate Judiciary Committee heard everyone. She decided to hold that hearing so every single person could have a voice that evening on that bill. And she decided to listen to law enforcement. And because they were concerned with the gutting of the permitting system and the threat they gave to the public, that she was going to strip that bill that night. And she did it in front of media and made sure that folks knew. And it was, Liz Brown is a terrier. And when she is your terrier, you can really count on her to move something. And I just loved how she did that out in the open and made sure every single person had the ability to speak, which is not guaranteed all the time in the State House. I still have not been able to testify on a bill that is sitting on the governor's desk right now with eventual House Bill 1211 that came about like a zombie on sine die. So this does not always happen, but Chairwoman Liz Brown made sure of it, made sure every person could speak. And then here we are hiding behind rules in the Senate with the reappearing in Senate Tax and Fiscal Policy with with the pro tem, pulling Senator Glick off the floor to change her vote in the middle of the committee hearing. I mean, that is just astounding. That needs to happen in caucus. So if you want to talk about caucus discipline and how you run a chamber, did not look good that day.
Mark, something I thought was interesting, Indiana, one of the things that a lot of folks who were proponents of permitless carry said that there are 21 states who had it, and Indiana should join those 21 states. 37 states have legalized marijuana, either recreational or medicinal. You think that's going to happen anytime soon?
You mean in Indiana? The medical marijuana is just amazing to me that it hasn't been legalized in Indiana yet. We generally are last, but we're almost getting there. So I'm surprised by that. But when it comes to the constitutional carry, as a libertarian, I don't own guns. I don't like guns because I find them dull and boring. I have no desire. I learned very early along in Boy Scouts that target shooting is boring, in my opinion. I live in an area and I work in areas where I feel very safe, but I think it's very important that the Second Amendment right be had by all who want to do it. And so I have no problems with guns whatsoever. To me, the only thing that a permit does practically is give another, what criminal defense attorneys call a throwaway charge when somebody's arrested for a lot of other things. By a throwaway charge, they're arrested for far worse things, but you get to throw that in there as a permit just in case that's all you can get, that they didn't have a permit. Many criminals, in fact, probably most criminals don't carry about permits, so they don't. The only issue out there is because of the safety factors, and some states are very, very for permitting. Indiana would need some registration to allow people to carry to other states. So as Cam said, in Indiana, it's really a pretty easy process to get a handgun permit. So it's not the most onerous things, but I have no problems with constitutional carry. I think it's the way it should be, but there's some practical considerations to work through, such as how do you deal with having a handgun in another state that requires permits.
You're watching Indiana Issues. I'm your host, Abdul-Hakim, editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org. Well, my friends, we come to the final couple moments of our program here. So we want to talk about big winners, big losers this session. Cam, we'll start with you. Who's your big winner? Who's your big loser?
I've got winners 1A and B and losers as well. I'd say Governor Holcomb came out of this session pretty good. And I would say what we've just been talking about, the gun lobby, were winners in this. Losers, I don't think that those that engaged in the culture comp and promoted a lot of the bills that we've talked about previously came off looking very well. They had some black eyes. Senator Baldwin, when we should be neutral on Nazis, was the paraphrasing of it. I know he misspoke there, but it didn't look good, to paraphrase Lindsey on another matter. And then, they won. They fought to a draw at least, but the business community was on the defensive with a lot of proposals this session with Republican supermajorities. I think that's a testament to the changing base of the Republican Party in the state and maybe the country, and to the continuing effectiveness of those business organizations. But I think it's a cautionary note for the future as we go into future sessions, how that dynamic changes and whether the business community will be on defense in the future or can play more offense.
Lindsey, big winner, big loser?
I think the big winners are going to be House Republicans with their race to the bottom. I mean, a lot of them have really huge challenges from the right. And so, I mean, you've got Representative Ed Clear who has like 5 primary opponents. I mean, that's just insanity. And so with their continued race to the bottom, they're going to continue their path forward in the Indiana General Assembly, thanks to their policies. And I'll be honest with you, the biggest losers happen to be Hoosiers, who are paying outlandish utility bills and cannot afford it, and continue to call 211 for help and have no answers because the trustees are running out of money. There is no more help for these Hoosiers, and so they are unfortunately the biggest losers.
Mark, you have the last word. The biggest winners and biggest losers of the 2022 session.
The biggest winner, it maybe surprise some people, are the people who don't like censorship. It was tough. There was a lot of issues out there trying to do censorship, but they did a pretty good job stopping most of it. So I think that they were huge winners, and a lot of people don't realize that. Censorship's an easy thing to do, and a lot of people have a gut reaction like, yeah, this is awful, but it's bad. Fahrenheit 451 shouldn't become something that we have to continually refer to, and we're just going to have to accept there's a lot of different views out there. But another big winner, though, are the school choice, the alternative school systems, because this is showing why one-size-fits-all public education doesn't work. You need to have, and this is not against public education necessarily, it's against a one-size-fits-all. And when you have different things to do, then people who are upset about how the school is teaching their kids can go somewhere else and not be upset. It just makes it easier and allows things to happen, like no censorship of books. So those were the big winners, in my opinion. Gun lobby did fairly well, I thought, in what they did. And the biggest losers, big business. Cam, you're right. They're on the defensive. I think they're going to continue to be on the defensive. The Republican Party that they liked a lot, and in my opinion, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, is not there anymore.
All right. Well, our guests on the program today have been Libertarian Mark Rutherford, Democrat Lindsey Shipps, and Republican Cam Carter. Folks, thank you all very, very much for being with us today. So we recap the 2022 legislative session. I'm Abdul-Hakim Shabazz, the editor and publisher of IndyPolitics.org, coming to you from the Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next time on Indiana Issues.